I'd like to bring up Lisa Bodell, and I'll tell you, Lisa, we've set this session up pretty well with opening up with the complexity of what's going on with the IRS, massive issues. Now we just talked about talent, and so many of the firms on this call probably have job openings right now.
Yeah.
The days are long. They're giving us an hour here for the town hall, which we appreciate. Lisa Bodell has been on previous town halls. She's one of the leading experts on how to get to the work that matters, simplification. So this is the time of the year to be thinking about this. So Lisa, welcome. I'm just going to let you first just reflect a little bit on kind of, what you're hearing in our environment and some of the broad thinking that you're providing so many of your clients. But Lisa, thank you and welcome.
Hey, thanks, Eric. And it's always a pleasure to be here. So thank you for giving me the time. And thanks to everyone here. I think you said, Eric, there's like 8,000 people giving us their hour. So, it's my job here to make it worth it. So, giving some reflections based on what you just talked about. And I know that Carl just said, it's funny, everyone talks about the great reset from COVID, and I'm actually calling it the great reflection, because that's really what happened to people. They had time to reflect, and they realized that they were having a lot of their time wasted, and they were doing a lot of unnecessary work. People were very productive during COVID, and they still are, but the thing that really got them wasn't not their ability to how much they could do, but what were they doing? What was the work they were spending their time on? And for most people, they thought it was on unnecessary things. So I think a good thing that comes out of COVID is people not just questioning how they work, but the actual work that they do. And companies that get it right, you were touching on this in your last panel, is key to retention. So what's cool now is that companies that actually focus on the meaningful work and the mental health, they have a better retention strategy and also a better recruiting chance. So I wouldn't underestimate what the great reflection has done. And I think companies that actually lean in, not just to the flexibility, that's one thing, but actually giving people work that is necessary versus unnecessary is critical going forward. And that's why we're seeing a lot of people that are really focusing on simplifying their work.
Well, Lisa, let's just unpack that a little bit more, the necessary versus unnecessary work. Because you were at Digital CPA, and it was in December a couple of years back, and you just talked about, you said, let's look at your days, look at your weeks, and where you're spending your time. And this, so just there's simple tips that you have, but they're actually pretty powerful and effective. And actually, your session there at Digital was watched repeatedly by many people saying, I kind of put these things in place to kind of get back control of my life. And then COVID, people with Zoom and all of these meetings, you lost control in a wild way.
Well, for a lot of people, right, it kind of got shot to hell, right? Everyone was like the best laid plans. And I'll share some tips here today for everybody. This individually and with your teams that you can use to get time back. I mean, I know I'm dealing with a group here that's pretty good with numbers. So, when I talk to large firms, say you're a firm of 10,000 people, right? This is when we work with like the KPMGs,
right.
And, they're much larger. If you have 10,000 people and they work, people work 2,000 hours a year, that's 20 million hours those people are working. If you could just get back 5% of that, that's 1 million hours that's spent on more valuable work. I mean, why wouldn't you do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of power in the numbers of what people can achieve. I think the issue is that people don't realize that they can simplify, right? And we've got it kind of backwards. I'll touch on some values and things in a minute, but for a group like you that is so time crunched, right? I think the brilliance of simplicity is it's not about how much you get done. It's what you're doing in the first place. Mm-hmm. So what we're trying to do is get firms to better define what the meaningful work is so people can shift their time towards that versus just focusing on process and not questioning how things are done. So that's a big thing right now in companies is we got to question how things are done.
And so when they question how things, there's a lot of small firms here. So firms of 5 to 15 individuals.
Absolutely.
How can they do a quick assessment of how they're doing things, or how can they do that audit of where they're wasting time?
Yeah. Well, we do diagnostics on it. You can get as detailed as you want or simple, but one of the things you can ask your team, get them together in a room and just say, tell me what your biggest time sucks are. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about that is it's simple and people have a lot to say. And, we see this in small and large companies. When you get people together and say, tell me what your biggest time sucks are, they will talk about processes, but what they're really going to talk about is tactical things. So, when you said, where does a lot of complexity come from? It's not regulation. I mean, you can tell me that it's regulation all day long, but everyone deals with regulation. Why are some people simplified more than others? It's really tactical. It's the way we work in terms of emails, meetings, processes, collaboration, too many Zooms, too many CCs, this kind of stuff. And if we focus on some of that tactical complexity by identifying the time sucks, that's going to help you get a lot of hours back.
Well, we've got a slide here that we can bring up that, kind of highlights some of the impacts of going simple. So let me move to that slide here. So here it is, simplicity benefits. And that's, I think it is so relevant to the discussion we just had, because you're right. You don't want to lose those employees. And you also, when you're trying to recruit that new employee, is you want to say, okay, well, I got a good salary number, but there's also this kind of culture here that just makes your days that much more productive and effective. But so here, I mean, I led the witness a little bit, but so why don't you cover this slide and kind of some of the down arrows for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think no one argues when we go in and talk to people about wanting to get rid of complexity. No one says to me, no, we're fine. That's just like, it's not a thing. But what the first thing that most people do is they think it's just a financial benefit. And it's true that it is. There's a great study done by Siegel and Gale. And they realized from interviewing companies all over the world, companies within the same sector that were simplified versus their competitors who were complex, they could charge more money for their products and services because people wanted to do business with them, right? You valued their time. Their stock outperformed others and their customers were happier, so they were more likely to get recommended and have repeat business. So if you are simplified, there's a lot of financial benefit there, right? Of course, there's productivity and time saved and all that too. But the real thing for people here is what's happening in the zeitgeist now, which are the cultural and ethical benefits. And let me tell you what I mean there. It's cultural because people want to do more meaningful work. And if you work at a company that is simplified, right, they focus on what matters, they eliminate the unnecessary, they don't spend time in unnecessary meetings, they report doing more meaningful work, they're more focused and engaged. So there's no, forget absenteeism, there's presenteeism, right? And that goes away in simplified companies. Your employees are more likely to stay and your customers are more satisfied. So that's not just recruiting, that's retention. So, one thing that we say is if you get the work right, you get the culture right. So you've got to focus on the work that matters because culture is the work you do every day. That's it, right? Because if culture was about more creative things and giving people just more time off or bring your dog to work, Google would have 100% retention rate and they don't. They pay people well, but they also give them work that matters. The last thing I'll say, Eric, that is kind of surprising to people is that this is a real ethical issue. And that's what COVID brought up is that, people realized how much of their time was wasted and it's a non-renewable resource. They'll never get it back. And, people used to just get mad when you wasted their money. Now they're getting mad when you waste their time. And I'm just waiting for the first employee that sues their company for wasting their time and wins, right? It's going to happen someday. So I think we've got to focus on that because it's a benefit if you are simplified.
If you want me, we got questions coming in here, so I'm going to grab a couple of them. So you think about the individual. So now you're thinking about the broad environment. Let's just bring it back to the individuals on this. You are an expert. You really kind of guide companies on how to drive this simplicity and this efficiency into their practices. What are some of the tips on getting caught up in emails, getting distracted with that client call that comes in? Or what are some ways that you can kind of go through the things that, and the studies, amount of time on emails, amount of time spent maybe just in discussions that really don't lead to much, and then obviously just potentially some meetings that are longer than they should be.
So when you look at the data, people spend, when you say what do you spend your day doing, over 70% is on meetings and emails. And so those are necessary, but are they done well? So some of the things that we tell people, let's talk about meetings and emails. So one of the things you can do is you can do a meeting audit, and you can see the recurring meetings that you have with your teams, and look at each one and see which ones can you get rid of. Because sometimes there's zombie meetings that don't have a purpose. And if you can't change the frequency, right? So it's about going on a time diet with your meetings. With emails, there's a couple cool things. You can, there's a good military practice called bluff, and that's starting all your emails with bottom line up front. You know, we spend a lot of our time leading up to our point when we could just say the point in bold up front and double click it from there. And we've shown that people that start to model bluff inside to their employees, those employees start to model it back, and their meetings start to get shorter because they learn to get to the point. Another one you can do is, I love this one with email called NNTR. And that's writing in the subject line, no need to respond. So if it's just meant to be a one-way communication, indicate it, and people don't have to feel obligated. You know, another one I would do that works really, really well with people is have a kill a stupid rule session. Invite everybody to come to a session for an hour, and they can bring all the stupid rules that they think are completely unnecessary and work as a team to see which ones you can get rid of.
Well, let's talk a little bit. I mean, I think there's a lot of good tips there, and that meeting audit in particular. I know a lot of people have taken you up on that, and they've been like, wow, this is, I just freed up 7 hours a month. So talk about innovation. We talk a lot about innovation. You heard automation, technology, but how do you view simplicity and innovation?
How do they work? Yeah. Well, it's interesting because we realize from all the work we do in innovation, like teaching people about change, they weren't able to do it, and we couldn't figure out why. And it wasn't because they weren't capital constrained, they were change constrained. They didn't have the time. And so the front end of innovation isn't about getting new ideas. The front end of innovation is getting the time. So really the front end of innovation is simplicity, because you've got to make the space and the time to be able to focus on the things that matter. And part of that is innovative new work. So I don't think you're going to have an innovative culture until you simplify so people can better focus.
Well, here's a little bit of the cheat sheet of some of the things that we just discussed. I mean, what I'd like you to kind of maybe, close with here is a little bit on the metrics. So you've given us some techniques on what you can do, and the importance of simplicity, on culture and recruitment. But how do you measure this? How do you kind of measure how you're doing?
There's a lot of ways you can, but the simplest one is one we learned when we were with Pfizer. And they asked people simply in their employee survey about their ability to get things done, and on a scale of 1 to 10. And they realized that was their lowest scoring metric. And that was the red flag to them, as people loved the culture and they said they were innovative, but they ranked low on being able to get things done. So if you just ask that simple question to your teams and see the answer you get, that'll open up a conversation to probe, why is it so hard? What's holding you back?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, I think this is what leads to employee frustration, and then that leads to employees looking. So it's like when do you start the search for a new job? When do you start the search to be part of the Great Resignation? Is because of frustration with how things are functioning, how you're working. So if you start with this, it's like you start with how to get to the work that matters, killing complexity, simplifying things. Then it can drive culture, drive performance, drive a lot of other things. So
it's empowering. It sends a signal that you're listening to them. And I think that's the most important. It's not about doing more, it's about doing meaningful. And if you listen to what they think isn't important, that's just as valuable to them because they feel heard. And I think that's an important point, Eric.
Well, we're going to highlight some of the resources, the more in-depth resources that we've done with you, Lisa. This is something that sometimes simple things, people are like, well, why are they talking about this in the AICPA town hall? We're talking about this because this will help you produce results. It will help you get through tax season. It will help you build the culture that you want to build. And that's even if it's just you're a sole practitioner. I mean, you want to have an environment that's positive. It's the most important thing. If you're a sole practitioner, or you're a small firm, you do. And as the firms get larger, it's obviously critically important. So thanks, Lisa. Thanks for being with us today. And we will highlight some of your other resources in our communication piece to the town hall attendees. Thanks.
Great to be